Election anxiety and stress is the overall theme. We're going to discuss some coping strategies and self-care, how we can take care of ourselves, our communities, our clients that we're working with throughout this. And then, of course, the action steps in civil engagement. So how can we turn these feelings into action? We also have some resources to share because we believe an informed voter, an informed person, that is the best way to overcome this anxiety. And then, of course, we're going to plug in all the exciting upcoming events we have. So sorry, I have things popping up on my screen and I get distracted easily. So election anxiety and related to stress. So even in the best of circumstances and the happiest of election cycles, it's still going to feel draining and it's going to be overbearing. If you use social media, I think all of us have to use social media, even if we don't want to. It's everywhere. You turn on the TV, it's everywhere. You can't escape these election updates, the news, and big part of that is just it's a very polarizing time. I don't think I need to explain that to anybody here. But it can be really draining on our mental health and the clients that we work with. So making sure we're owning our feelings, we're practicing being present focused, right? When we're out with friends and family, maybe we don't have our news alerts turned on and start spiraling because we see something that is just, it's scary or it makes you feel uneasy. Connecting with your community. How can we give back or how can we canvas? There's a lot of really great nonpartisan opportunities right now for canvassing so we can feel like we're taking action, doing something tangible leading up to election day. Or if it's something a little bit removed from election work, right? Just being out in the field, doing something interesting and fun. Knowing your strengths and your capacity for things, knowing when it's okay to say no, put a pause on something, and then focusing on things within your control, right? There's only so much we can actually do within our control, but a lot of that does tie to taking action. And we're going to talk about a little bit about that today. So Emme, I think you're up first. And Emme, we were super inspired by some of Equality Michigan's post on voting while trans and some of the barriers that folks face, things that I know I didn't even think about some of those challenges until like that attention was brought up. So I'm glad it's something that Equality Michigan's focusing on. So a question that we have for you are, what are some ways you can help overcome feelings of disenfranchisement and disempowerment in the political process?
Yeah, great question, Dana. And so the post Dana's referencing is Equality Michigan started a coalition of LGBTQ organizations across the state of Michigan and allied organizations. We called it the Hate Won't Win Coalition, like hate will not win. And what we've done for this election cycle is worked together. So our team has created, we basically create 2 social media posts a week that are under this kind of uniform brand, the Hate Won't Win brand. And we push it out to the community center partners, other partners doing voter engagement work. And we all sort of just pepper social media with the same content, during each given week. And Dana happened to catch a post we had pushed out that just said voting while trans and helping provide resources to trans folks so they can get more comfortable with civic engagement. I'm a trans woman. I remember the first time I voted when I was like, quote unquote, baby trans, we would have called it. And it was a very nerve-wracking, anxiety-inducing experience. Waiting in a long line in Ann Arbor, Michigan at the time. And just the stress and anxiety that goes with sometimes with just being a trans person in public, right? And everything that goes with that. And we would hate to see someone be discouraged not to use your voice, especially when we're talking about voting, which is one of the most powerful ways we can use our voices in this country, and especially in the state of Michigan in a year like this year. And so in terms of ways we can help overcome feelings of disenfranchisement and disempowerment, I would say, one, we have to lean on our support networks. And not everyone has the same sort of support system, right? But this all kind of comes down to a conversation of preparedness and knowing the laws and rules in your state. I mean, we live in Michigan, which we're fortunate that in the last 4 years, Michigan has gone in a direction where we've made voting easier. We've made democracy and the ballot box more accessible to people. And so we've been doing a lot of work highlighting that because I think about how anxiety inducing it was to go to the polls that year, like I just said. And I don't want other people to be discouraged from voting because of that. And so a couple things have changed in Michigan that are really significant. Mostly that absentee voting is incredibly accessible here now. You don't need an excuse. You can actually register for an absentee ballot online. You can get on a thing called the permanent mail ballot list, which means every election, as long as you're still at your current residence or whatever address you provided, as long as you're still there and that's your voting address, you will be mailed a ballot for every election. Not an application asking if you'd like to vote absentee again. You will be mailed the ballot for that election. And the methods of turning that ballot in have gotten easier. So not only is it less stressful to be able to sit down at your table or on your couch or with a friend and ask questions and do your research online or whatever you have to do to get comfortable casting your votes, especially when these ballots are like a full front page and a full back page in a presidential election year. So it helps you feel better about the decisions you're making and more informed. But then, when we talk about returning it, there's multiple options. You can put it back in the mail. You can return it in Michigan to a ballot drop box. I will note for Michiganders, it has to be your designated ballot drop box. You can't take it to any ballot drop box. So be sure to go to the Michigan Voter Information Center on the Secretary of State's website and figure that out. You can return it directly to your clerk's office, right? And so what does that do? You're making a more informed decision, but you're also giving yourself the permission to feel safe about voting. You're not subjecting yourself to that anxiety. Not to mention all of the contingencies we might deal with if we wait until election day anyways, like a car breaking down or childcare emergencies or getting sent out of state for work or, the million things that could happen when we wait until Tuesday, November 5th to cast our ballot. And so, that's one thing I've really been promoting with the trans community this year is like a safety issue is that absentee voting can be a lot of times we have to dispel myths that absentee voting isn't safe and secure. I would actually argue it's could be more safe and more secure for certain populations of people, especially when we talk about psychological safety. So there's that. There's also in Michigan a 9-day early voting window now, so it will be less packed. I can almost promise you, going in that 9 days before the election versus on election day, you'll probably deal with slightly smaller crowds. So, if you're voting in person and you're for some reason you don't want to vote absentee, but you still want to vote in person, really recommend leveraging that 9-day early voting window and take some of that anxiety about being in these crowded public spaces with strangers and people wearing political t-shirts or whatever else is happening at the polls, right? So, it's just doing our best to reduce the variables, like take as many of the variables out of it as we can. And now it's just us and our ability to use our voice and participate in our democracy. So can't recommend the early voting methods enough. But let's say even a smaller crowd is still stressful. Or let's say you're still voting on election day. Because you know what? You didn't turn in your absentee ballot and now it's November 5th, or you forgot to request it and now it's November 5th. So let's just start with, we're not going to beat ourselves up for that, right? We still have a chance to vote the way we've always voted in Michigan, right? So, but then what's our plan on election day? So it's important to have a plan, right? We know when we do things that are just sort of like off the cuff and impulsive, we're subjecting ourselves to more stress, right? When we haven't figured out what time we're going to vote, right? People are more likely to vote when they know what time of day they're going to vote, when they know what method of transportation they will use to get to the polls, whether they already know where their voting location is, when they already know what their ballot looks like. And you can look up a sample ballot online, right? You can look up what your ballot's going to look like when you get there. You can do all of these things in advance of election day. And the thing I always recommend for trans folks who have support systems and people who live in your area, find a friend to go to the polls with you. Because look, I'll tell you two things. One, find someone else who's going to go cast their ballot, right, in support of your equality and your rights. So there's that, like, let's double our vote or whatever. But there's also this. You can bring someone who can help you at the polls, right, for a number of reasons. Let's say English isn't your first language. You can bring someone to assist you. You have a disability. You can bring someone to assist you. You don't feel comfortable with all of the language and words on the ballot. You need some assistance with reading. Someone can assist you at the polls. And certainly in terms of psychological social safety, no one can tell you can't bring a friend with you to stand at your booth and be there for support. So, I mean, doing all of these things is, I think, a form of like, let's just accept what we can accept, that we have anxiety, that we have fear, that the world wasn't built around the concept of safety for like gender and sexual minorities and trans people and queer people. And once we accept that, start to navigate like, how do we be effective and impactful in a way that prioritizes our safety and well-being? And so I think all of these things are things that are up for discussion and things we've been promoting when we talk to, our voters, our supporters, our members, and our constituents this year.
Emme, I could listen to you talk about politics all day and voter rights. I could just do that all day long. Thank you so much.
Yes,
I
thank you.
know I saw Charlie hop on, so what I'm thinking is I'm gonna make sure all three of our fabulous panelists have time to speak, and once all three of them have answered their prompts, open the floor for questions, because I just want to make sure they have the time they need. So obviously, Emme really focused on in terms of like being like the empowered and informed voter, right? And that's going to be a consistent theme as we go throughout this, and we're going to share some resources at the end. But to talk more about maybe I don't know about everyone else, but when I'm on TikTok and I am doom scrolling away and I can't get away from it, knowing when to put the phone down, knowing when to turn the news off. I actually don't have any news alerts on my phone anymore because I get upset very easily. And then, of course, balancing that information consumption with something fun and light-hearted is important to keep in mind. I love a good dachshund wiener dog video to cheer me up personally, or I'm a sucker for watching 2000s music videos still. Also enjoyed the VMAs the other night and all the Britney Spears references, right? So making sure we're mixing in the important stuff with the fun stuff to keep things lighthearted. Now, I believe I saw Charlie hop on, and not to throw him into it because I know he went from meeting to meeting for us to be with us today. But Charlie, are you here and able to introduce
Yeah.
yourself?
Hey. Hi, Dana.
Hi.
Emme, that was great stuff. I can listen to you all day too.
Right, absolutely. So Charlie Cavell is an Oakland County commissioner who's also a social worker. So a great example of social workers getting involved in politics and running for office. I've known Charlie for a few years now and have had the opportunity to work with him on a few things in Oakland County. So I know I kind of introduced you as well, Charlie, but I'll let you take the floor. The question that we have for you are, what areas of political interest are you confident in? But I'm going to add something a little bit to that just because I know you. When you're not confident in a political interest, how do you go about navigating that? So the floor is yours.
Cool. Thank you, Dana. I think, yeah, your addition is the more interesting part. Um, uh, So what political areas am I interested or confident in? I think I'm confident in, okay, so first, just to help us all, because we're all social workers and stuff here, or at least people in a giving field, um, I think the big thing is offering um, the perspective that we are entitled to the struggles, not the spoils, if everyone knows that line. So, um, the people in the 1960s in America either are or would be happy to see, I think, by and large, how things have changed in many ways, right? There's still a lot to do, but there's also a lot of things that are better. And I think that's the best we can hope for. And I think for us and where we are now in 2024, it'll be a similar type of thing in 20, what's that? Let's just say 2084, right? We may or may not be here, but we can at least know that we are entitled to the struggle, not the spoils, right? So we are making things for the people that are living in 2084 better by what we do here and now today, even if it feels very small. Even if it's something as small as like giving your mother-in-law grace when she's talking about something. Maybe that's too personal of an example, but we all have that thing. So I think that's one big broad point. I think to what Dana's prompt is that we are again not entitled to the struggle, or we're entitled to the struggle, not the spoils. I think another thing is, as a part of that, when we think about that, we can build community just through the process, right? Being in the work. Where can we find joy in the work? The work of giving grace to your mother in law, the work of being kind to maybe a client of yours that's receiving benefits from the government and then is like, I hate taxes and the government's the devil. And you go, that's so weird, because you would literally be homeless or without health care if it wasn't for these government benefits I'm helping collaborate with you on receiving. That there is joy in the work of meeting people where they are. And as social workers, we have to do that like 50 times a day at work. And then we have to go home and do that like 10 more times with our family. So I can understand how exhausting it gets. But perhaps the reminder that the reason this person is yelling at me, or the reason I'm getting like all hot and bothered about this issue, is because I'm working hard to meet them where they are. And that's just the burden we have chosen to bear. Whether we knew that or not, getting into this is where we are now. So we just got to deal with it a little bit. Some good ways to deal with it, just as we all know, definitely be in therapy if you're not already, just for life stuff, but also for electioneering or campaigns or 2024. Definitely figure that out if you haven't yet. As Emmy and Dana, I think, can attest, because we've known each other for a few years, I've become chiller since being in therapy the last couple years, right? So it works. Okay. Um, a, a better smile from Dana and a very slow nod from Emmy. Got it. Okay. I'll stay in therapy. I'll go to my appointment today. All right. Um, and then, oh, I think one thing that's really cool to what you said, Dana, because I took a note on this beforehand, is, at least in my life, maybe this isn't what you all face, but at least in my life, I've noticed or learned that anger is a secondary emotion to fear, right? Because I think that's the big context of what we were talking about is, so at least for myself, when I've felt angry, that's because I'm afraid of someone trying to hurt me or people who I feel I represent. But then also, of course, it's on the shoes on the other foot, in that um, we see people that get angry at us, but that is their secondary feeling of likely fear, generally. So not taking that personally or recognizing it in yourself so that you can cope ahead with that. So I think those are just kind of my little plaudits, that if we find joy in the work, we recognize that we're entitled to the struggle, not the spoils, so that it is then easier to find joy in that work or passion in the process of meeting people where they are, and also in that process building community. So because again, um, I think part of the most fun I've had in my life has been like working with, for example, Emmy and Dana on efforts or campaigns where you didn't know if you were going to win or it didn't work out, but you built community in the process, and that is very cup filling. So I think those are all my little one-liners.
And that's a really good point, Charlie. The making sure you're filling your own cup while we're going through such a like tumultuous time, even like politics removed, right? I would say like when it's not an election year, but technically it's always an election year with local
Amen, for
issues.
sure.
I don't
Yep.
want folks to ever forget that. It's not just every 2 years, it's every year there's an election somewhere. But so regardless of that, making sure we are finding the joy in the work, and like it's social work, political work, which again, it's one and the same, right? Social work is political. But you know, we go into this work, it's often like thankless, right? Like the work that we do, we shouldn't be going into it for the thank yous though. So how can we find the joy in it along the way? And building community, I really like that as well, Charlie, because you're absolutely right. Like along the way of doing this line of work, we are building communities, whether it's our coworkers, the coalition work, the volunteers, anything in between. So I really appreciate that. Charlie, do you have anything to add before we switch gears? There's gonna be time for questions at the end.
No, no, no.
You're good. All right. We're gonna move on along. So Charlie kind of touched on these a little bit here, but the negative impact of other people's speech and actions on your well-being. I think this is something that we've all experienced. And if we've somehow been lucky to maybe not experience that, then you definitely know someone or your clients and communities have experienced this. Um, and I know I struggle with this as well when I hear something maybe I don't agree with, if it hurts my feelings, if I feel like it hurts somebody I love and care about. So how can we best like address that, overcome that? And so much of it is self-awareness, taking the time to reflect before we react. I was speaking to my previous supervisor. Her name's Taylor Eberhardt, another fabulous social worker in the community. And we both are working on, practicing the pause, right? So when you read something, you see something and you want to respond right away because you're fired up. But how can we practice the pause? Think about it. And I think that also touches on perspective talking as well as effective communication skills. Practicing the pause is huge. As well as not riding the roller coaster is something is a phrase we use a lot when working directly with clients. When you're working with people and they're fired up and they're angry, it's so easy. You want to jump right with them and enter the chaos head first. But is hopping on the roller coaster really in the best interest to make change? Or is it something, again, practicing the pause, really thinking about it, coming up with a plan, connecting with the experts? Is that the better approach? So something to think about. Knowing your limitations and your safe spaces, something I think I won't speak for all social workers, but a lot of social workers really struggle with boundaries and limitations, saying no, and the importance of that. I know it's going to be something I work on probably for the rest of my life in this field, but being mindful of it even, right? Like it's okay if your boundaries and limitations aren't perfect, but are you aware of that at least and taking care of yourself? And then of course, something we're going to keep saying is engage in intentional self-care, especially after any exposure to harmful or destructive speech. I know I've had to kind of build my social media algorithm brick by brick to kind of protect myself because when I'm on social media, I don't necessarily want to be seeing the negative. Sometimes I want my social media to be a way to just turn off my brain for a little bit. And I think that's okay. And we necessarily shouldn't be getting our news and information from social media anyway, right? So Silas, not last but certainly not least for our panelists today. Again, I know Silas had like a huge hand in planning this particular event today, so I'm glad they get to be involved as a panelist now and share their experiences. So the prompt we have for you, Silas, is what are some of the socio-political roots of harmful rhetoric, and what are some methods of addressing them in a productive way? I know I struggle with it because it's easier to want to insult people or call names when this happens, so take it away, Silas.
Yeah, thank you. And I think Charlie kind of got to a bit of this of like a lot of this just is fear and ignorance, and it kind of really shows itself through bigotry. One of the things I want to add from the last slide is also a method of addressing this is I have made my like boundary of I don't really do any type of political discussion on social media. That just basically my belief is I think more or less mainly people don't get their mind changed through a debate on social media, whether TikTok, Twitter, Facebook. Uh, and Charlie kind of talked about this with community. That's where people's really their mind gets changed. I know a lot of with the organizers this year, this election season, we're talking about relational organizing, which is really organizing through your own network. So like your family, your friends, and having real discussions there are so much more powerful than just than arguing with someone from high school on Facebook about whatever lie or rumor is getting spread throughout this election season. So that's what I would say. The first method of addressing them is really talking to whoever's in your network, making sure. Well, first, let me backtrack. Make sure that you yourself are informed and educated, because I think that's really missed out in advocacy, the education part. And I know me and Danielle throughout this series, we've talked about it so much of education is advocacy. So make sure you have a good news source so you get probably have multiple. I mainly get Washington Post, like New York Times, so many. The more news you take in, the more news sources, the better you'll be able to root out lies, root out rumors, and be able to see what is truly happening with the issue. So first, educating yourself, and once you educate yourself on these topics, and you're able to fight misinformation, you're able to fight that misinformation within your network, within your family. And I know sometimes I hear a lot about like the Thanksgiving conversations and the arguments. The next part of that is I really have a boundary. If I discuss, I don't debate. Uh, if anyone's ever coming at some of these issues, especially issues that are lies and rumors, if they're trying to debate humanity of a group, or trying to really spread rumors in a and they're at a point where that rumor is truth, and that misinformation is truth in their life, I know that I, at this point, cannot reach them. And that's kind of tough to always realize, is that, we can't reach everybody. And there's a reality where maybe I can't reach that person, but maybe Charlie can reach that person. And that's just a reality that as social workers, I think we have to accept, that not everyone in the world is going to be able to listen to us. And I think as a queer person of color, that's kind of been a hard thing to learn, but it's been a reality of, like, there's some people that when they hear from me, it's just harder to accept than hear from another person. Um, so just knowing your limitations, like the last slide said, that some people aren't going to listen to you. And again, having a discussion is going to be a lot more fruitful than really if people are in a debate, because then it's going to get heated, it's going to get argumentative, and you're going to feel burnt out, and it's just nothing's productive. It's only going to be negative. But a discussion, like even Charlie said, you can meet people where they're at, have a discussion, and understand you can really get to the roots of why people are really buying into these rumors, buying into misinformation, or buying into whatever ideology that they are promoting. Because a lot of it is just fear. It's really easy to get scared, anxious, and I think if we really dig deep into it, these fears and anxiety, they don't always come from a bad place. There's a lot of ways they come from a good. Like, they just want to make sure that their family is living a good life, and they have fears that they can't give their family a good life. They have fears that maybe they're going to lose their job. They have fears that they won't be able to live their dreams out. And those are all very real things. I think that we all really have to work through. And then, but again, once we have those discussions, we can really meet on that human level and really build that community, as Charlie was saying. And that's how we can take those steps forward outside of misinformation and move in a way more productive future.
Thank you so much, Silas. You brought up a really good point, and the kind of tie to it. Something I learned through my social work education is like the importance of assuming positive intent when we're working with people. And there's always going to be someone who, yes, maybe they are out to hurt some feelings, and hurt people, and we know that's just, it's part of where we're at right now as a society. But a lot of people simply don't know. When I used to work in affordable housing and worked with landlords, there were just a lot of landlords who simply like just did not understand the laws. There's no classes they had to take to become a landlord, right? And what I would feel like is they're, being discriminatory or prejudiced towards certain groups of people. A lot of times it ended up being that they just didn't know. And I found that like having those discussions, right? Not arguing on Facebook or turning something into an argument, because that's, we're so passionate about these things, but just having a discussion, meeting folks where they're at is so much more powerful of a tool than jumping right into the arguments. And you're right, some folks were just not going to change their minds, and that's okay. But what can we discuss? What can we have like a civil conversation about? We have to have allies on all different sides of the aisle, all different sides of the community. So how can we make that happen? So thank you. Before we dive into any remaining like resources that we're going to share today, I did want to open the floor up if there's any questions. I've seen a lot of stuff happening in the chat, which is great, but does anybody tuning in today? I think we have like over 80 people on the call, which is fabulous. Does anybody have any questions for Emme, Silas, or Charlie while we have them here? If you want to, I guess, maybe unmute or raise your hand. I'm so not good at like monitoring this when I'm sharing my screen, so I apologize, but does anybody have any questions for our three fabulous panelists?
So while folks raise their hands, there is a question in the chat. Sarah asks, do you have recommendations on supporting, empowering, and protecting non-voting groups, such as non-citizens or even young folks under 18?
That's a great question. Oh, I saw Charlie raise his hand, but I saw Emme unmute. So whoever wants to go first. Emme, how about you go first? Oh.
Charlie, go ahead.
Oh, but Emme, you're already unmuted. All right, no, okay. Well, I think well, so two things came to mind when that person asked that question. Great question, because I think first there's what you can do for the groups that you lifted up, right? People that aren't citizens as non-voters, and I think a lot of that requires building community. So it's not like a thing you do on October 31st. If stuff starts getting real and you're like, oh man, they're coming for the Venezuelan migrants. Crap, how do I help the Venezuelan migrants in my town that aren't voting because they're not citizens or whatever? I think that it's not a October 31st thing. It's over time you've built a like trust and a bond in a community. Like for example, I guess I am a literacy coach for like an English language learner for a guy who is a Venezuelan migrant guy here in Oakland County. And so like I'm on a couple of group chats now with like 300 people and I have WhatsApp. So that's one way to do it, is like kind of being a part of a community to an extent and also knowing your place in that, which again takes time. Great question though, and thanks for thinking about that. I think on the other side though, there's thinking about people like my next door neighbor who also isn't a voter, but he's a white guy from Farmington and lives here in Ferndale now, and he's a libertarian, and he hasn't voted since 2012. So there's also those people, which again I think goes back to what Silas was saying about the Thanksgiving conversations, and I think what Emme, Silas, and I are all saying of like meeting people where they are, because you can't ruin the relationship with your next door neighbor, because then they're not gonna take your trash cans out when you're on vacation, so like it's again a humbling thing. So that that's not like an uplifting answer, but it's the honest one, right? Again, I guess we're entitled to the struggles, not the spoils. Maybe that's more what that looks like to an extent.
I just want to I think Charlie said everything I wanted to say. I just want to come at it from the perspective of an issue advocacy group, right? And that is, when people hear advocacy, they think nowadays about like lobbying and they think about elections, right? That's what you think of as advocacy. We talk about advocacy work in terms of a cycle, which is like this kind of self-perpetuating thing, right? Where we're constantly feeding it. And so, yes, we are at the time of the year where we are going and asking our constituents to do something. I mean, it is for them, but we're asking them to do it for us, right? For our issue, for our interest. And that's voting, right? And remembering to think about LGBTQ equality when they're casting their ballot, right? And prioritizing that issue. But as soon as November 5th is over, we snap back into this mode that is like, we're going to talk to them about what we can do for them from now until 2026, basically, right? And then at some point in 2026, we'll switch back into asking them to do this thing for us again, right? But in the in-between, like we're constantly organizing, engaging, and communicating with people about like what we need to do to make progress, where we have made progress, where we're going backward, making sure they know that politics isn't, at least in my opinion, democracy wasn't designed or isn't designed to be transactional, right? And that there's opportunities for people to engage besides casting a ballot. And you can be eligible to vote or not, but you can still request time to talk to state legislators or talk to city council members or county commissioners about issues impacting your community. You can still organize within your community, right? And I think young people always remain and always have been, I think, in the US, in the modern US, like an incredibly impactful group of people who aren't franchised, right? Like they can't vote, but they continue to influence change in our society from all of the awareness they've brought to us on environmental issues the last couple of years and gun violence prevention issues the last couple of years. I mean, we had a situation this year in Southwest Michigan where administrators put a new policy in place that said, trans students need to use the teacher's lounge for the bathroom. And that was the new school policy. And the students were like, this is a policy you put in place because two parents made a big stink about a trans student using a bathroom. And we, the students, would rather see you do this policy. Like, they put the policy in front of the administrators, and the administrators listened and adopted it, right? So like, I think anything we can do to help amplify the voice of students and help them with their organizing efforts are also ways to kind of like, they might not be able to vote, but they can be incredibly influential with the passion, education, and actually a decent amount of wisdom that young people have, because they tend to approach the work from a much purer perspective than the rest of us, and they don't want to settle. They don't want to settle for less, right?
I'll also hop in. I'm gonna put a link in chat of, it's called deepcanvas.org. I think they do trainings. They do pretty me, Emme, and Charlie are talking about with meeting people where they're at. Deep canvassing does a really good job of training how to do that. I also say, when advocating for groups that we may not always be a part of in that community already, I would say the first thing before advocating is making that connection. Because if you want to know how to advocate for them, make that connection, and I think they'll tell you. Because they know what they want. They live the life that they're in. But making that connection can definitely, making that connection first will definitely help you for then get into the advocacy part of things.
I want to touch on a point that all three of you have brought up throughout this. So thank you for all three of you for contributing to that question. But from a social worker perspective, I want to throw out there, Emme made the great point that when we hear advocacy, we think of lobbying and elections. And I think that sometimes steers our social workers away from getting involved because they hear those words and they're like, well, I can't do that. I can't lobby. I'm a social worker. I have to stay nonpartisan. Social workers shouldn't get involved with voting in legislative efforts. I've seen that more times than I care to count, and that's false. It's actually in our code of ethics that we are supposed to be involved legislatively, and we are supposed to be educating our clients and our communities and empowering them and informing them so they can make these decisions. And you're right, we can't tell people who to vote for. We can't tell them to vote for candidate A or candidate B, but we can show them where they can find that information and make sure they know where their polling location is, or help them with their how to get their absentee ballot. But on the flip side of that, we can always advocate for issues as social workers, and we should be, right? There's the NASW Social Work Speaks. That's all the positions that social workers have taken on all the important social issues facing our communities and our clients. It's literally in the job description, no matter where you work, that we should be caring about legislative and advocacy issues. Advocacy is different than lobbying, right? Like, advocacy is organizing and going in and educating our stakeholders, our elected officials, our coalitions, any group that we need to educate on an issue. It's important that social workers know the difference, because we should be involved. We need to be involved. We're supposed to be involved in these issues. I don't know if there were any other questions, but I have a question, because I know all three of you, Silas, I'm making an assumption, but I think I've learned enough about you over the weeks that I don't think I'm making a false assumption. You can correct me though. I know all three of you have been involved in all sorts of organizing, especially during an election year, whether it's campaign organizing, issue organizing. I know all three of you have experience in that field. Does anyone have like an interesting story, maybe maybe like you learned something along the way? I think we can talk all day long about organizing and campaigning, election stuff, right? But unless you're in the field doing the work, that's when you start learning. Does anyone have an experience worth sharing? I know I learned some things along the way when working with Charlie on affordable housing issues in Oakland County. I learned all sorts of stuff about how the government works that I don't think I was ready to learn. But until I got my foot in the door and started working with the county commissioners, I learned a whole bunch, like how counties can't just come up with laws that all the cities have to follow. And in fact, it has to be a step-by-step process. So Charlie, Silas, or Emme, any fun stories from organizing where you learned something brand new? And then looks like Jane has a question right after that. So Any fun organizing stories, especially during an election year? I'm sure y'all have them. But now I'm putting you on the spot and you have to think of one.
I got one.
Yeah.
Part of fun and also like just part of like felt really rewarding. I was in Kentucky for undergrad, and I was the BSW representative and intern for NASW Kentucky. And part of what we were doing, there's some social workers running for the state house, running for re-election actually, in Lexington, and got the chance to help canvass for them. Uh, and I will say, I am not the biggest canvasser. I don't love like the door knocking. But I was like, I should do this, and I went and did it. Um, and that election was super close. She ended up winning by like 20 to 50 votes. Uh, and it really kind of showed me, especially on the local level, like those canvassing and working on campaigns on those really like the local level, you really make a difference because I could be a cynic and be like, oh well, maybe I didn't really move that many people when I canvassed, but I knocked more than 50 doors that day. There's a chance that I really played a significant role in helping them get reelected, helping another social worker stay in office. Um, so I'll say like that's a lesson I keep to my heart of like always look local first. I know we have a locally elected official with Charlie. So I think realistically, uh, even though I'm focused in my job currently on national campaigns, if you really want to get involved, I would say look around. And basically every PACE chapter has their endorsed local candidates. Really get involved there because you can make a really big impact.
Local elections and local, like I feel like, the local stuff doesn't get the glamour that some of the state and federal stuff, especially the federal stuff. So highlighting the importance of that local work is so important. And if anyone takes anything away, remember, elections are not every 2 years, they're every year. So get involved locally. Charlie, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, I thought of like 30 things
Of course.
because I love knocking doors. So this is but just some fun examples to then highlight the main point of what you're saying, Dana, which is so first, I think the main point is like democracy, if you will, is working, if you will. I mean, again, these are kind of like loose phrases, democracy and working, but basically, like if you guys have ever met a state representative or a congressperson, like, or a county commissioner, like they or we are all just doing the best we can. And it's just literally the person that raised their hand got lucky on election day to get more votes than the other person. So like it's literally like it might seem whatever, but like, and this might be too radical, but part of the benefit of like having a person elected that then has like a security detail or a bunch of people wearing suits with like big like attaches behind them being like, oh, we have to go to the next meeting, ma'am. That just gives you an aura of like power, prestige, and knowledge. That's not actually what has to happen, right? Like the smartest person or the best person or the nicest person or the meanest person doesn't have to win an election. They just, again, were the person that filled out a form before the filing deadline and then got enough votes on election day. Probably did some stuff in between, but also not always. So, like, when you're talking to folks about politics, it doesn't need to be this thing on a pedestal because it literally could be you. Like, literally, I got a 21 on my ACT. Okay. Like, I'm not that smart, but for some reason, I represent like 80,000 people in Oakland County and I'm part of the thing that runs the $1 billion county budget from your taxes. Okay. So, just that's the part one. Part two is a cool example to what Silas was saying about like the relational organizing and the deep canvassing. I'm going to use an example of knocking on doors and then my mother-in-law so that it relates to all of you because you can and should be organizers because you are so knowledgeable. You have on the ground experience. Right when I was working in the field, I worked at homeless shelters. So when people talk about, oh, these homeless people, they're all on drugs or they all are this or they all should have been smarter or they all should have been more personally responsible. I had also a retort to that because I would say, well, I have this client or I know these people or these other folks that relate to you or your experience. So my wife was a school counselor, same sort of thing. So in your field and your day-to-day experience, you have gems within you of just stories of what you've experienced and how we are all like in community together. So just remember that, okay? That you actually already are 90% of an organizer. The last 10%, if you're doing it already, great. If you're not, it's just tell people your stories. That's organizing. That's it. So here's two stories. Uh, in Oakland County, we did we're doing a student loan forgiveness thing for everyone in Oakland County, and we've started on erasing the medical debt of everyone with terminal debt status in Oakland County. So there's 80,000 people medical debt and up to 170,000 people student loans. So I was knocking on the door of a Republican, and I was talking to her, and I brought up, hey, we just passed this thing for student loans forgiveness, and she said, oh, that's terrible. Don't do that. And I said, oh, why not? And she says, well, because people chose to go to college. It's their fault if they got student loans. Me and my big house here, I paid for my kids' college. They don't have student loans, but that was their choice, And you go, okay. Well, let me ask you, how do you feel about medical debt? She said, oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. No one should have medical debt. I think it's the worst thing ever. And then you go, well, that's interesting because didn't people kind of choose to smoke or eat McDonald's or do those sorts of things? So that light push got her to kind of crack her head open and go, okay, maybe I shouldn't have rushed to judgment about student loans and also medical debt, right? So that light push after also talking about her flowers, after building a rapport, right? This is what Silas is talking about when he says deep canvassing. So just giving that example to say that there is an opportunity to kind of open people's minds a little bit if you do it in a polite, respectful way where you meet people where they are. Second thing, just to use an example with my mother-in-law, because we don't agree politically. Silas also said part of it is the messenger. I didn't think he said it that explicitly, but part of it is like, right, some people can't be reached, but other people can, depending on who you are or how you present. So my wife talked to her mother-in-law about healthcare, and it was just a mind-blowing conversation. It took 2 hours. So again, recognize that if you haven't done a lot of political organizing or destructive political conversations around your Thanksgiving table, just to say that it'll take a couple hours, but that because my wife was my mother-in-law's daughter, she kind of made my mother-in-law think that Medicare for all is a cool thing because she was just the right messenger. She was a very good listener. And like Silas said, she engaged in a discussion, not an argument. So again, we all have done this 1,000 times. I think what Dana is trying to prompt us on this panel to say is be an organizer because you're already doing it. Just think of yourself as that and then kick ass because we need you to, because your clients need you to be a good advocate, because the reason we don't have enough funding for homelessness prevention is because there isn't enough people in government that care about it enough. The reason we don't have affordable housing, the reason schools are underfunded, the reason why we're talking about cutting counselors or social workers, or at least in Oakland County, people that work in the health department to keep people from being at risk of HIV or suicide prevention, we cut those positions, is because other people have, I guess, more vested interests. And so that doesn't have to be the way it is. That's all.
Something that Charlie kind of drew out of Silas's answer made me want to bring up something that I met with Detroit Disability Power yesterday, and something they mentioned were that social workers are often trusted messengers in their community or with their clients. So to tie everything they said together, like our role as social workers, we can have a huge influence on making sure our folks are informed and empowered, because we have the privilege of being that trusted messenger in so many different spaces. So thank you both. I really appreciate your answers. And I know we have a question from Jane as well as one from Savannah in the chat, but Jane, I know you've been waiting super patiently, so please ask your question.
Well, I'm going to just ask you, Dana. First of all, I want to thank all of you. Second of all, I want to ask you if I can share a story, because I think it's really beneficial to realize what this work entails. And
Please.
I had a very interesting experience. Oh God, 30 years ago. Between 1988 and 1990, I was very active in HIV/AIDS work. And there was a bill called the Hobson Bill in Ohio that was to provide money, care, etc., to people with HIV/AIDS. And we had a very Republican, I don't like labeling people, conservative group of senators, one being one of the worst, and he was really outrageous with what the things he said about LGBTQ people. And I called him up and he answered, which was like mind-boggling, but and I still remember this so well, Senator Sue Huldanik. And I said, I'm just calling you about the Hobson bill. And before I got past that word, he was about to hang up, and I heard his son say, "Dad, can I have the car keys?" And I said, "Oh, you have a son that drives?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, I'm just curious. Do you know what kind of condoms that he should be aware of that would protect him if he ended up being sexually active?" And Hobson, I think, was falling off his chair at this point. And he says, "Well, no, I don't." And I said, "Would you like to know?" So then I educated him. And at the end of this conversation, he says, "Boy, you really educated me, but I still am not going to vote for the Hobson bill." But it was just so hysterical because having that engagement and having him like, "Really? You're going to educate me about condoms and you're going to tell me my son is sexually active? You got to be kidding." But it was great. And, that taught me at that very moment, and I was pretty young at that time, thank God, the power of engagement, not necessarily changing anyone's mind, but just being real, being authentic, and speaking from your heart that you really care about people and that we're all human. And it's not just gay people and LGBTQ that's affected by HIV, but that 5-10 minutes just changed my way of thinking about being a real. I grew up in a family of advocates and really marching with my mom and through all my life. But that was a really magical moment, and I think all of you are really talking about how to engage people, and that moment was a moment of engagement that really had a huge impact on me. So I'll just share that. Thank you. And I hope that was of interest to people. Also, one more thing. I do teach stress reduction relaxation techniques. And I must say, the best thing you can do for yourself, if you can find someone to train you with breathing techniques, meditation, visualization, qigong, whatever works for you, we all benefit from different techniques, but make it a part of your daily life because it'll help you live with sanity and with balance and with productivity. So thank you.
Jane, thank you so much for sharing because I think you highlighted like the overall theme of what all these stories and questions have been getting at is just the importance of that like authentic and genuine engagement with folks, even if maybe we're not going to change their mind, maybe we can't sway them one way or another, maybe we still don't like them at the end of the conversation, but we took the time to have that conversation to hear both sides. And I think that's so important. That's something social workers can and should be bringing to the table, right? Everything we learn in school, all the experiences we have through work and applying what we learn, all comes back to that real authentic engagement with people. And absolutely with the mindfulness exercises, fun story, my therapist recommended to me is like sticking my hands in like a cold like ice bucket of water to help me like come back down from things because the mindful breathing doesn't work for me, but we all have our things and making sure we have stress relief stuff that works for us is so important all the time, but especially during a stressful election cycle. I see one more question from Savannah. Oh, there's a couple more questions, I think, but from Savannah, I definitely want to get to hers and then see how much time we have after that. But Savannah asked a great question. So what would you recommend for someone who is in sort of a freeze state in terms of political issues? I find myself getting overwhelmed with emotion and shutting down when trying to engage with political content. And then the shame about this fuels ongoing avoidance. So I think we kind of touched a little bit on this, but I know in Michigan, we've we've been lucky enough to put in the work to be able to vote on certain issues. I think of the 2022 election when we had 3 huge proposals to vote on. But not every state is in that situation, right? I feel like that's a conversation I'm having a lot with folks who don't understand like the repercussions of things getting overturned at the federal level. And what that means for all states. Here in Michigan, you know, we haven't felt too much of a change, but that's because people have put in the work to get things on the ballot for us. But I know that's not the same for other states, and we have some of those other states on the call with us. So, Silas, I know you know, you're working in Ohio and you worked with other NASW chapters, so I don't know if you have any input. I see Emme came off mute too, so I don't know who wants to start.
Hey, Dana, I just wanted to clarify, and
Yeah.
maybe Savannah, you can help.
Sure.
This free state, are you referring to like you're just like a personal state of mind when engaging with politics? Like you sort of shut down? Is that, am I interpreting that correctly?
Hi. Yes, you
Yeah.
are. Kind of just
Cool.
like
Okay.
with my own identities that I hold and stuff, and just seeing things and getting like, oh my gosh, like everything just feels so bad, you know. And I guess like a sense of being like disempowered, if you will.
Got it. Yeah, Silas, do you mind if I go first here?
You got it.
Because I see you're oh, thank you. Okay. I've definitely felt that way before. So let me start there. And like because we're not just like in a uniform state of being like every single day, right? Like I have felt that way in the morning and not by the afternoon, and I have not felt that way in the morning and then felt that way when I was going to bed that night, right? So it's like sometimes it feels like a more permanent state and sometimes it's more, you know, fluid or whatever. But I think for me, when I was always feeling that way, I had to like, I don't think I did this at the time, but retrospectively, like I think some of that required more introspection, which was like, okay, why do I feel this way? Right. And I think there's some obvious answers there, which are like, this is like you said, it's impacting multiple identities you hold or at the intersection of a couple identities. And that can be really stressful. But like, you know, for me, when I was, you know, in my 20s organizing and things like that, like it was go, go, go. And I kept pushing myself. And I was really burning myself out. Right. And didn't take the time to do like the real work like on myself. And I'm not talking about like, look, I'm not judging folks if like your self-care is like getting a weekly mani-pedi or something. Like folks got to do what they got to do. I'm talking about like even drinking like more than 8 ounces of water a day, right? Or like not ruminating on thoughts until 3 a.m. or whatever, right? And so for me, it was a lot of like unpacking and figuring out like being more selective about what content I'm digesting, right? And if there's something positive I can do with the content I'm digesting, or I'm just like, if my form of activism is like reading the news, I typically find myself in like a pretty rough place, right? But if my form of activism is like, I only need to know about this issue because I'm working on this issue, or like, you know, I think I can make an impact here, or I think me being more knowledgeable here can do something for myself. So I just think like, there's only so much information our brains can take in, especially when it's impacting us. And so there's no scorecard out there like, oh, Savannah didn't read the New York Times article about this today, right? Like no one's secretly, actually, I'm not going to make a promise for the New York Times that they're not secretly keeping track of what we're reading and not reading, but they shouldn't be. That's a fair thing to say. And I think, you know, from that perspective, it's like, we don't need to digest all of the content out there. We don't need to digest all of the bad news. I think we need to like, think of ourselves the same way. Like, I know when I have too many tabs open in my computer because my like 6-year-old laptop the engine starts making like really loud noises. And I'm like, okay, maybe you have too much going on today, right? And I think our brains and our bodies are a lot like that. So I think maybe just being selective about what you can control and not control, and not just digesting content because we feel social pressure to be hyper educated on everything, but digesting the content you can and want to digest because it feels like something you're working constructively on. So not saying that's perfect advice, but that's, I think, what helps me kind of compartmentalize the work.
No, that helps a lot. Thank you.
And I'll just add, one of the like great sayings one of my friends gave me is tend to the garden where you can reach. So it's like really just, and I think social media has really hurt us in that way of like thinking back to like the summer of BLM and like the blackout screens, like, oh, you have to put something on your story or else you're a bad person. That's not real life. And I think it's kind of hard, but you just gotta like I myself like I make that disconnect as best as I can because if we're also doing real advocacy of like going out, educating ourselves, like focusing on issues, it doesn't really matter if I put something on my story or not, or if I read a certain news article. Uh, but yeah, I think like I will also share like same thing with Emmy. Like like when I just a couple years back, when I was just going a mile a minute about everything in advocacy and organizing, like I suffered like multiple anxiety attacks because I would stress myself out so much. But I think also it at least helps me to like look at, okay, there's 80 other people on this call, or even in any other like social work setting, there's like so many other people. Like, okay, it's not just me. Like I am not I forget what the Greek myth is, but like the dude that holds up the sun, or not the sun, the sky. We're not that. Like there's so many of us. We're all fighting on this issue. Uh, so really, just tend to the garden where you can reach. Do your part, and if we all do our part, we're all good.
Thank you for that too.
Oh, sorry. I tried to click off of mute and then I clicked all sorts of things along the way while I was doing that. We have a few minutes here as we kind of like wrapping up here. Were there any other questions? I didn't see any other like direct questions in the chat. I don't know if anyone wants to come off mute, if there's any other questions before we start talking about ways to get involved. And some exciting events coming up. I'm also going to be putting Silas on the spot to plug in any Ohio events. So this is your heads up to be prepared for that in a couple of slides.
Dana, I'll also add one thing
Oh, please.
that I think has really helped me with my anxiety when it comes to election and stuff. I forget who told me this. Might have been a TikTok, honestly. So a good thing from TikTok. But the way I view it is when it comes to, I think, yeah, November 5th, when the election's done, our country, the world is neither killed nor saved on election day. The fight is going to continue on that Wednesday. And that's like, a good and a bad. So it's like, we're not going to solve all our problems on November 5th, but we're not also doomed when we wake up the next day. There's still going to be a lot of work to do as social workers. There's still going to be a plethora of communities to help out. So while, there is a lot of anxiety, and I think it's fair to be like, have some fears, some stress, some like angst around this election, know that the world's not going to end on November 5th. There will still be the USFA on November 6th, and still reasons to continue with advocacy, continue the good fight.
Can I piggyback off that, Dana?
Please.
Yeah, I'm not on TikTok, so I think I read this in a paper magazine, but they say that right, elections are commas, not periods. So then what that also means is that I think this is what Emme was also trying to lift up, and what Silas was saying about deep canvassing, and again, the whole like primer Dana's giving us on this is, right, don't get despondent, get organized. Don't get sad, get active. So like on November 6th, if you were on this call today and on November 6th, you're not calling the ACLU or trying to get plugged in with NASW or whatever, then politics will be happening to you, not with you. So like it can't be like Emme was saying, it's not this elections are every 2 year, or Dana, elections are every 2 years. So you can check out, then freak out, then check out, then freak out. Don't do that, because that's them playing you. Reverse that, have a steady flow of being involved and being active. And that's freaking Dana's job, right? Is to help you have ways to get active, help it so it's easy for you to have a meeting with your state representative, have it so it's easy for you to talk to the governor's office about why we need more homeless funding, or why we need more affordable housing, or why we need XYZ change that social workers care about. So like if you're not involved on November 6th, I mean, to be honest, as a politician and a person, I got way less sympathy for you because you're here now.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, everybody. And Charlie's absolutely right. And I think that's another theme that we've kind of heard throughout this. Like, it is every year and it is all the time. And whatever the outcome of this election is, I know we talked a lot about the election because this is about election stress, but something we can and should be doing year round is organizing and working on these issues constantly. Because Silas is absolutely right. Nothing's going to be saved or anything after the election. It's just one decision that we had to make along the way to all the rest of the work that we have. So absolutely keep that in mind, that the work doesn't stop after the election and it doesn't start up again in a year and a half when there's all, state and federal campaigns. Like, we need to be organizing around these issues all the time. And I have to believe that everybody on this call is a social worker or social work student, and you're here because you care about something enough to do that. So thank you, everybody. We have like about 15 minutes left. So if there's any other questions, please throw them in the chat. I'm going to be highlighting some resources that we have for people who want to learn more and get involved. So something I kind of shouted out in the beginning, and I think something that Emme, Silas, and Charlie have mentioned along the way, is the best kind of voter or the best kind of organizer is an informed one. So we have this flyer. I know it got a little wonky on the PowerPoint here, but I think the overall gist of it is still clear. So we have a resources for voters and social workers flyer, highlights the important dates, including that early voting period, when election day actually is. Shout out for our Michigan folks. We have same day voter registration. So if for some reason you can't get registered, or it slips your mind, or it's overwhelming, you can go register at your local clerk's office and vote there same day in Michigan. So keep that in mind. We have our election protection hotline. That's a national hotline because I know we have folks from other states on the call. So keep this number in mind. I'm so bad as soon as it starts changing to like letters instead of numbers. So I have both versions here, but if you can remember 866 our vote, that's how you can get connected to the election protection hotline. Share that with your clients, share that with your community. Make sure they know that they have the right to vote and they can have some protections when they go do that. Voting as Social Work is a great website. If you're not familiar with it, please check it out. There are voting as social work resources for students, for teachers, for clinical social workers, for hospital social workers. They will even send you a little badge with a QR code that you can wear around the office, and people can scan that QR code and register to vote, and they'll send that to you for free. So check it out. Promote the Vote Michigan is someone we've been working really closely with, especially this election year. And they have a huge coalition of Michigan-based organizations. There should be a Promote the Vote chapter in every state. So I know this is Michigan specific, but I think these resources, if you Google, you should be able to find them for your own state as well. But get connected, see if there's an interest group that you're interested and connected with, and check out their websites, because the free resources they offer folks are amazing, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. The resources are available to us from the experts. Promote the Vote and Michigan Votes in particular have lawyers on their staff who make sure everything they put out is accurate and legal, so you don't have to worry about giving false information on accident. And then something Michigan has that makes things really easy is mi.gov/vote. That's the Secretary of State voting website. If you can remember that and share it with people that you're working with, you're going to be in a good spot when you're out in the field connecting with folks. So this flyer is available. We've also shared it with all our schools of social work. If you want it, you can email us. We'll be sure to get it out to people. It's there to share. And then we have all sorts of events coming up. Probably the one that I'm going to highlight first is our Legislative Education and Advocacy Day. That is our biggest event that we host every year. It is virtual. It's on my birthday. I've been telling everybody it's on my birthday, October 17th. We have like really amazing speakers this year. We have Promote the Vote, Vote ER, Detroit Disability Power. We also have Michigan Department of Corrections coming to talk about their reentry services, Center for Behavioral Health and Justice. There'll be some social work licensing updates. So all sorts of amazing stuff coming up on that day. And again, it's virtual. We also have a newer event coming up with Register Her. So they reached out to us and we got connected. And they work with everybody. I know it says Register Her, but they do work with everybody about how we can mobilize people like social workers, teachers, anybody in those like community type roles and get them out with the civic engagement tools they need to get folks registered to vote. There isn't an effort to get more women and LGBTQ plus community members in elected office because they continue to be woefully underrepresented in our elected offices. So really excited to be working with them. That's going to be October 4th. That is free. And it's also 1 CE credit for folks who are interested. And that's open to anybody. You don't have to be in Michigan for that one. So something to keep in mind. They do the training all across the country. And then we are doing a social work votes event with Wayne State. It's another free event. It is geared more towards our students, but it is open to the public to talk about why social workers should care about voting and how we can get involved. And there'll also be a Michigan licensure update at that meeting as well for our folks who are interested in following along our licensure modernization journey. Before I actually click off, Silas, I know you have some Ohio events, so I'm gonna let you plug those in.
Yeah, so I'll put the Zoom registration in for our meeting or our webinar that's happening next Friday from 12 to 1 with Ohio all voting is local. Our Ohio voting laws are very different than Michigan, sadly. Our registration is on October 7th, our registration deadline. So we're going to talk about all the things you need to know to be registered in Ohio, get your absentee, everything you need to know about voting. I'll also plug in just the election protection website because they also have some pretty cool ways to get volunteered to volunteer with election other than with a campaign or poll working. You can be a poll monitor and help make sure people get to vote. You can be a peacekeeper and make sure to try to die down tensions at the polls. A lot of great work to do. And then I'll also pop in my email if you are an Ohio person and want to learn how to get involved more or get connected to a campaign, please email me and I'll make that happen.
Silas, I'm so happy you brought up the poll watchers with Promote the Vote. But before I dive into that real quick, Emme posted a link in the chat. So for our Michigan folks, if you are around Oakland County or Grand Traverse County, Equality Michigan is doing some really great canvassing, especially if you've never canvassed before and you're nervous about what it means to knock on doors. I know it's not everybody's favorite thing, but it can be fun once you get the hang of it. It's a nonpartisan effort, so you don't have to worry about anything like that. You won't be breaking any rules, helping them out. If you're a first-time canvasser, they do pair you up with a buddy, and you are knocking on doors to make sure people are ready to vote. Do they have a plan? Are they willing to make a pledge to vote? Emme, anything else to add to that? I know I don't want to steal it from you, but
No, not really, Dana. I would just say we use a kind of a unique format, which is we talk to people that generally support or should support LGBTQ equality, and then we just make sure they have a plan to vote and are aware of all the methods they can vote and how to cast their ballot. We collect physical pledges to vote at the door, so people write their names and addresses down and make promises to us, and then we mail them back to them closer to election day. It's actually a really good time talking to voters and not having to like push a candidate's name on anybody, but you're just you're really there just making sure they're making their voice heard, and that means a lot to people. So it's unique. And then it's not online at the moment, but it will be in the next like 24 hours for folks in the Detroit area. On October 2nd, we're doing a drag show and text banks. So we'll be texting voters about turning in their absentee ballots while we put on a drag show at Pronto and Royal Oak. So if you want to come hang out and do something kind of fun and flashy, recommend that one. But it's not online yet. We'll be on our Mobilize in the link I put in there in a day or so.
thank you so much, Emme. And yeah, it's a great opportunity and what almost like a low stakes way to get involved with canvassing. Because like Emme said, we're not pushing a candidate one way or another, but it's making sure people have a plan to vote. As Emme said, people who have a plan to vote are more likely to go vote and feel good about it. And then the last plug I have here, unless anyone else has another plug in as we lead up to the election and beyond, of course, is the Promote the Vote poll challengers that Silas mentioned. So that is a way to get involved. Maybe you want to do something on election day. You want to be involved and do something tangible and feel part of the process. Promote the Vote is always looking for poll challengers, and that is a way to be involved nonpartisan. And the best part is the training for that is offered on demand. So you can take it anytime for free and be ready to go so you can fit it into your schedule. So please check out Promote the Vote's website just to make sure if it's something you're interested in, take that training. A really great opportunity. And I see Caitlin asked a question as well. And Caitlin, I don't know if you're in the Michigan, any good resources for people who are homebound or have mobility issues, want to get involved but not able to go door to door. I know there's always like text banking, and phone banking is a great way. I always liked text banking because I have a bit of social anxiety over the phone sometimes. So text banking seemed like a really great way to get involved. Oh, Julie said telephone canvas. You can call voters on behalf. Any other suggestions? I think phone banking and text banking are great ways to get involved there. Even just sharing stuff on social media, gosh, if there's like a link to something, I think even just like sharing it across platforms is a really great way to get involved and give things some visibility. Postcards is another good thing. Postcard writers, lots of good stuff in the chat. Amazing. All right, Danielle, do you have any wrap up notes here as we're coming to the last few minutes?